Buster Olney, thanks to Buffalo Wild Wings, joins Armen and Levack every Thursday at 5:15. The best of Buster today at 6:30. And Buster, we said earlier in the year that the Yankees starting rotation was better suited this season to handle attrition than it was last year. Now that Tanaka is out temporarily and Whitley is out for the year, how strong are they now?
I still, I think they're in decent shape, and part of the reason why is I just think with teams, so challenged offensively in the American League East being so mediocre, I don't think that's that big of a deal, especially since it sounds like Tanaka's making excellent progress in his rehabilitation. They're saying, as they did at the time he went down, that they thought he would be back within a month. That timetable seems to be going okay when you got Michael Pineda going well. Some of the other guys in the rotation are okay with a good bullpen. I think they're the pitching is not going to be the issue. I don't think there's any question going forward that the bigger issue is going to be in their offense. I had a scout tell me over the weekend if at any point Brett Gardner, Jacoby Ellsbury goes down, the Yankees are going to be in big trouble, and now we're going to see if he turns out to be right.
Now, yeah, you bring up Jacoby Ellsbury. The biggest knock on the Yankees when they give him that 7-year, $153 million deal is the guy is fragile. Is this a sign that maybe the Yankees made a mistake on this deal?
I think it's too early to say that. Look, there's no doubt about it that part of the reason why the Red Sox held back and what they offered Jacoby was because of that injury history that you referenced. He coming into the year, I think they felt like that he was going to be fine, and he's healthy all spring. And then on that one weird swing, suddenly he's going to be out for a time. And I just know how conservatively the Yankees handle injuries. I think you're going to see Jacoby probably miss about a month, unless this turns out to be more serious than what we expect. Because I think they'll shut him down. They'll make sure he's healthy. They'll bring him along slowly, and they're going to have to make do. And this is going to be a real challenge for them. Because now you're moving Brett Gardner into the leadoff spot, you're sliding Carlos Beltran in the number 2 spot, and we're going to have to see if they get production of the 2 through 9 spots, which are just so inconsistent.
Buster Olney, thanks to Buffalo Wild Wings with Armen and Levack on 104.5 The Team. Buster, the Yankees have now dropped 7 of their last 8. What's the biggest concern that we've seen out of these last week and a half?
I still think it's the offense, and I think, and I mentioned to you guys during spring training that the evaluators of the other teams were talking about this being the most shiftable lineup in baseball. Look, for a Brian McCann, for a Mark Teixeira, and Alex Rodriguez, a Beltran, Chase Headley, that's a huge deal. It's a big problem for them. And I, before the season started, I took the Orioles to win the division, and I had the Yankees being a wild card team. And if I could get a mulligan on that pick as of today, based on what we've seen so far and, where the teams are and what the resources are, I would take the Red Sox because they've been terrible at the beginning of this year in a lot of different ways, and yet here they are right in the mix at the top of the American League East because no other teams run away with it. And the thing is that the Red Sox have a lot of different options. They have a ton of resources in terms of tradable assets that they could flip for the pitching that they need, and they have a lot of different options and guys to consider in their everyday lineup. And the Yankees, besides the potential upgrade at second base, what you see is what you get. They can't change Chase Headley. They're not going to change Mark Teixeira, a Carlos Beltran. They kind of have to ride it out with what they have because of the financial investment they have in these guys.
Buster, I saw that you had written the Yankees aren't drawing on the road, and you attribute that to them not having a face like they've had in the past. And it brought to mind that, yeah, that's true. I mean, I don't know really the identity of this team. I don't know who the guy is, who the Jeter, the Mattingly, the whatever is. Do you think the organization is aware of this and a little nervous?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and they had hoped that Tanaka would become that guy when they signed him. But, of course, once he got hurt last year, that sort of takes him off that sort of marketability, and especially because I think everyone's waiting at some point for Tanaka's elbow to blow out fully. And the reason why Jeter and Mattingly and before those guys, Thurman Munson and Mickey Mantle were really popular with the fans in part was because they were all homegrown. And all these guys getting honored at Yankee Stadium in the last couple of years, they're all homegrown, and they don't really to this point appear to have that guy. They certainly don't in the major league level. You're not going to have a setup man in Abdel Betances be that sort of presence. And, I think from the Yankees' perspective, right now, maybe the best hope of the guy being growing into that stature might be Aaron Judge, this huge slugger who's kind of a Giancarlo Stanton-type physical feature. We're just going to have to see if he's going to be good enough to do that. He certainly is playing well in the minor leagues so far, but that to me is the big deal. I went to my 10-year-old son's class last week, and it really was striking to me when I asked them about, okay, who's your favorite Yankee? I got back Derek Jeter from virtually all of them, and of course he's retired, and they don't really have that guy following him.
Wow.
I've been trying to push my kid towards Brett Gardner.
And Gardy is a tremendous professional. He's a great guy, but he's not that. He's not a superstar player, and they need their next superstar, I think, in order to get back to where we're used to seeing them in terms of what they're going to draw on the road.
Buster, only thanks to Buffalo Wild Wings with Armen and Levack 104.5 The Team, your home for Yankees baseball. Buster, it looks like there's a line with how far the Yankees will fight the A-Rod arbitration. Hal says that they would abide by an arbitrator. Is this the Yankees softening on this issue a little bit?
No. Not at all. I think that Brian Cashman laid it out in Fenway Park where, he said the Yankees abide by their contracts. From the Yankees' perspective, because of the way this marketing agreement is structured, the Yankees' position is that they feel like because Alex is no longer a marketable player, they didn't exercise their end of the agreement, and they feel like contractually they're allowed to do that. And they're very confident that they're going to win if this thing goes to an arbitration. And if it doesn't, and Brian made it clear, he said, look, we honor our contracts. And if in the end, the arbitrator says the Yankees lose, then I think what Hal said is dead on. They'll be like, okay, well, we thought we would win that, but we lost. I don't think the relationship between Alex and the organization has changed. I think if you gave truth serum to the people in the organization, they don't trust him. And on the other hand, you can't possibly say anything other than he's handled his return about as well as you possibly can in the way that he's answered questions, in the way that he's conducted himself, and certainly he's been better than what people expected at the plate, certainly better than I thought.
All right, Buster. So yesterday's game, a lot of the attention not coming down to the actual, who won and who lost, but Bryce Harper, kind of showing up the umpire. Where do you stand on him getting kicked out of the game?
I thought that Marvin Hudson, the home plate umpire, didn't have enough patience, and he needed. And I think going forward, if he's in a similar situation, it's hard to say, well, I ejected that guy because he put his foot in the dirt to show me where his foot was in the dirt before. That's just not going to sound good in the report. That said, and I do think that Major League Baseball needs to have some transparency and come out and make a ruling. If they believe that Marvin Hudson was in the right, then come out and make that announcement. If they don't, then he probably should deserve some sort of discipline, and they should announce that as well. Now, that all said, this is happening too much to Bryce. It kind of reminds me of the conversation that we've had the last couple of years where, Bryce would run into a fence or he would slam against a barrier or in the wall along the foul line. And, Bryce would always say, well, that's just who I am. That's how I play. Well, no, that's not really a good answer. You need to make that adjustment. And he's been, ejected twice now in the last week. And yes, he's a fiery guy. And yes, what an unbelievable talent. He's on a pace right now to set the record for most walks for any player at 22 years old, breaking, if he continues this, the record of Ted Williams. But he's got to find a way to keep himself on the field, and maybe he can work a little bit on his umpire relations.
Buster Olney, thanks to Buffalo Wild Wings with Armen and Levack. Buster, with the Nationals starting to surge, does this kind of mean the Mets are coming back down to earth? Maybe more, this is the picture of what we expected to begin the season a little more?
Yeah, and we talked about before the season how the Nationals have this ridiculously easy schedule. Only one series against a team that made the playoffs last year before June 18th. I think that's manifesting itself. I think some of the guys who were struggling or injured early have come back and they're playing well. But I think at some point the Mets have to stabilize. Now, you would guess that's going to happen because anybody who's watched Syndergaard in his first starts, oh, my goodness. I mean, the pure stuff that he's bringing out there. And Jacob deGrom, having him and having Harvey. When you have pitching like that, you're not necessarily going to get into long losing streaks, but they have to get some offensive support. And the question is going to be, where is it going to come from? Because it doesn't seem like David Wright is close to coming back. And some of their veteran players are slumping. I hope at some point that they surprise all of us and go out and make a deal for a hitter, because it just looks like they're going to need help before we hit the trade deadline.
All right, Buster, you are the voice of reason in my baseball world, so somehow, some way, explain to me what is going on with the Miami Marlins and the Dan Jennings saga.
I have never heard as much conversation about a managerial hiring in the industry as we got with this one, because, of course, Dan Jennings had never coached or managed professionally before this hiring. And right after this announcement came down, I was getting texts and emails from people in the game saying this is an insult to baseball, that the Marlins could think somebody with that background could do this job. And let's make something very clear. Dan Jennings is a great guy, and people really like him. He's been a scout for most of his career, except for the time he's been in front office. Very gregarious, but there's absolutely nothing in his background that suggests that he could do this job or is qualified to do this job. And that's why, people who've been in uniform for years they are so angry about it, because they feel like, after, guys wait for years for opportunities like this, how could something fall like this to someone like Jennings? And I think this has become a referendum on that whole question of what's the value of managers. And you got a lot of people in uniform, coaches, current managers who had to wait a long time for their jobs. They are rooting like crazy for the Marlins and Dan to fail. And on the other hand, you have people in front offices, the spawn of Moneyball, young general managers who are saying, it's not a big deal. Managers don't mean that much. They're essentially White House spokesmen. The real plan and the real work comes from the front office. And it's going to be interesting to see how this thing turns out. I will say this. I think early on, the early returns are not good. I mean, besides the fact that they lost the first 3 games, there's just a way that you have to answer questions. And I think Dan, his lack of experience in that regard has shown through already.
It's crazy. Buster Olney thanks to Buffalo Wild Wings. Buster, you wrote today about the trade market. Is your column today at ESPN.com. Become an insider. It's worth it, man, every single month. Basically, the trade market, in your mind, you evaluated it, but yet there's still so much it's still unknown.
Yeah, and speaking with executives, they believe that the fact that the Giants and the Royals came through the wild card route, and not only to make the playoffs, but all the way to the World Series, that those will be held up as examples by other teams as, we're not going to sell, because if we happen to make it as a wild card team in the playoffs, then who knows what could happen after that. Right now, executives believe that the Milwaukee Brewers have essentially declared themselves, and they let other teams know they're willing to talk about trades. The Rockies, I'm hearing the same thing. They've told other teams that they're willing to talk about some of their guys. And Troy Tulowitzki is a completely separate conversation from that, by the way. But for the most part, in the executives I spoke with don't think there are going to be a lot of teams declaring themselves at least before the All-Star break, because they're going to want to exhaust every chance that they're going to be able to rebound from a slow start. I think the team that everyone is really curious about right now is Oakland, because Billy Beane, their general manager, typically is very aggressive, and they have some of the most popular guys when you talk about tradable pieces, and Scott Kazmir, the former Met pitcher, and Ben Zobrist, who could certainly fill a lot of different roles for contenders, and Stephen Vogt, a catcher who I think would be a great fit for the Boston Red Sox.
All right, Buster, I'm trying to scoop you for once in the world of baseball, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it, but we got a local kid who's about to go into the draft. Keith Law's got him around 12. The kid's name is Garrett Whitley, and some people are comparing him to Mike Trout-type skills. I don't know if you've heard of him yet, but you got to keep an ear open for him. And with any luck, we'll have a Niska unit kid front and center on the Buster reports moving forward.
That would be awesome. What I know of him is what I've read. I haven't seen him in person, but Keith brought him up on the podcast today when we were talking about it, and that's pretty cool. And, you guys are going to have an opportunity, it sounds like, to, for the next 15, 20 years, talk about a kid that you can say, we saw him back when.
That's awesome. Yeah, and going to his games and the amount of scouts and attention he's getting, it's been a lot of fun here in the Capital Region. Buster Olney, thanks to Buffalo Wild Wings. Buster, don't you have to go to bed soon? You're filling in for Golick tomorrow morning on Mike and Mike, man. How's that going to go? What time do you have to wake up for
fun.
that?
I'm sure that I'm co-hosting with Greeny, and inevitably our conversation turns to farm animals.
What?
Okay, because of my background growing up on a farm. And Greeny just can't. He just can't comprehend any of the stuff that goes on with farm animals.
I will pay you to bring something with you, even a chicken.
Well, we had that, 4 or 5, or was it 2007? We had the cow milking,
yes.
Which I suggested to them. I said, if Greeny loses his contest, you ought to have him milk a cow. And when it was all over, I apologized to him because I said to him, for me it was kind of like something fun to joke about. And then when I was there and I saw Greeny's face, and especially when this very docile cow began to swing its head around looking for something to eat, this 1-ton Holstein, I realized, looking at Greeny's face, he was sincerely afraid. And I kind of felt bad about it.
Well, Buster Olney and Mike Greenberg in the breakdown of dairy cows tomorrow morning at Mike and Mike, 6 to 10, right here on 104.5, the Team ESPN Radio. Buster, we always love it. Look forward to it. We'll talk to you again next Thursday.
Okay, guys, that sounds great.